it's not apples to apples. I mean, when you compare a pay TV bundle and the amount of money that you may be spending on subscriptions, that latter part could include things like Netflix, which are never going to be part of that bundle in the first place, but they're part of your experience with what you watch.
Hey gang, it's Monday, September 27th. That's too much enthusiasm for a Monday. I'm sorry. It's Monday, guys. I feel how you feel. Paul and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily and eMarketer podcast made possible by VTEX. I'm Marcus, and today I'm joined by one of our principal analysts and head of our advertising and media coverage. It's Paul Verna.
Happy Monday, everyone.
Oh, tone it down, Paul. We just talked about this. Today's fact, we are running out of helium for balloons. It's not quite as dire as you may have heard, but helium, you probably haven't heard anything, but helium is in fact a non-renewable resource. And when it is released, it escapes Earth because of how light it is. That being said, a huge reserve of helium was found just a couple of years ago in Tasmania, so we should be all right for a little while longer.
I've got plenty of it right here. But if anybody needs a little extra, I've got some.
I thought that was right. I thought you actually had some. Wow. That was a heck of an impression. So I've never inhaled helium and spoken in that squeaky voice until this past summer when me and my mum tried it. She was like, let's do this.
Wow.
It might have been the funniest 4 seconds of my entire life.
Yeah, it's a little too funny.
Yeah.
Considering how dangerous it is and how bad it is for you.
Yeah, which is why I've only done it once for 4 seconds. Yeah, so definitely don't try it. Paul was just pretending, folks. He doesn't actually have helium.
Yes, don't try this at home.
Definitely don't. Anyway, today's real topic, how the pandemic changed people's relationship with cable. All right, Paul, today we're talking about cable and how the pandemic changed people's relationship with it, what it looks like across the pond, what the price is up to, and also a few other developments. We're going to start by talking about some of the latest news which prompted this episode. So in Q2, you had a lot of the major research companies for TV coming out with their own estimates on what cable subscriptions were doing. And when we say cable, they're really including kind of cable, satellite, and telco. By and large, all wrapped up within their numbers. You have to go into detail to really pass things out, but a lot of them, that's what they're talking about here. We sometimes refer to it as pay TV or cable. They're going to be kind of interchangeable for the sake of this episode, Paul. But Kagan, they said that the losses to cable, telco, and satellite, they include all of them. Losses to those three were 1.5 million in Q2 of this year. You had Moffett-Nathanson research firm saying 1.4 million US customers dropped those traditional pay TV services, cable services in Q2. And then you had Lightman Research Group, which is one that we track very closely for the purposes of putting together our own forecast on cord cutters and pay TV households. They had a 1.2 million decline in Q2. So Kagan 1.5, Moffett-Nathanson 1.4, Lightman 1.2. Either way you look at it, it's 1 point something and it's not good. That was Q2 of this year, Paul. What do you make of these figures and comparing it to what happened last Q2, which kind of gives us the question of what's happened to cable during the pandemic?
Yeah, well, first off, these three researchers are obviously, they all have slightly different figures, but the common denominator here is that the traditional pay TV ecosystem continues to lose subscribers at a quite rapid pace, while digital pay TV providers like Sling TV and YouTube TV and Hulu with Live TV, they're gaining, but not nearly enough to offset the losses on the other side. So the net is a loss in pay TV, and by pay TV here, I mean in the big sense, traditional pay TV and digital pay TV.
Yeah.
So that's unmistakable. I think all of these figures point to the same trend. The pandemic effect is interesting because, for sure, Q2 of last year, when viewership went up, it was clearly due to people staying home and readjusting their media habits, their lifestyles, and just absorbing the shock of what was going on. So we saw a bump across the board in a lot of streaming services and even traditional pay TV. that was not destined to last. And what we're seeing now is the downside of that. I think also, though, it's important to not exaggerate the pandemic effect, because it's a little bit like saying that what happened to traditional retail or what's happening to traditional retail was pandemic related, when in reality, a lot of these trends were in place already, with Amazon basically taking over, taking all of the oxygen out of traditional retail. And a similar thing, I think, has been happening with pay TV. I mean, before the pandemic, you and I and others on the podcast had a lot of conversations about the changing nature of how people pay for what they watch. And this is just an extension of that, with the pandemic playing a part, but not too much of a part.
Exactly. Yeah, this trend definitely predates the pandemic. Losses to cable, they slowed in Q2 2021 from a year ago, according to media research group Kagan. But they say the deceleration of cord cutters did not fundamentally alter the long-term trajectory of cable. We see that in our own figures for like 2019 numbers, percentage of households in the US that had pay TV. We're talking cable, satellite, telco fiber. So the percentage of households who had pay TV, 65% in 2019. That dropped 5 points to 2020 to 60, and then a further 3 points to this year. So you saw an extra point or two come off in 2020, but it's going to continue that steady 3 point per year decline, marching to 46%. Paul, I'm kind of shocked to see those figures get below that 50% mark. We've been waiting for a while, and it's going to happen 2025. It's going to be at 46% of households who are going to have pay TV. Moffett-Nathanson pointing to sports as a big reason for this, noting that the dramatic over 40% decline in the Tokyo Olympics viewership this past summer didn't help at all. And also all sports kind of seeing ratings declines to some extent. And as Paul, as you mentioned plenty of times on this show, sports and news, the kind of last bastions of that pay TV subscription. So once you lose those, you're in trouble.
Yeah, and just to back up for a second, I misspoke when I was talking about what happened last year, particularly in the second quarter, where clearly streaming services saw a huge bump, but traditional pay TV did not. So what we're really talking about is comparing the rate of loss last year and to this year, but the loss has been a constant.
Yep. There was an article we were reading for this, Paul, from The Economist, noting that in Europe the opposite is happening. According to Ampere analysis, the share of French households with cable is rising, currently above 90%. Over 90% of households in France have cable. Over 60%, 60, of German households have cable, and nearly 60% of British ones as well. When it comes to cable, Britain will overtake America this year, notes The Economist. Paul, they pointed to a bunch of reasons why, one of them being price. The leading UK cable package called Sky, owned by Comcast, it can cost between 30 to 40% less than a cable package over here. I just text my family, my parents, my brother and sister, and ask them how much they pay for Sky. And they have a lot of the add-ons, so they're getting up closer to what cable is over here. The average price of about 100 to 105 bucks for a cable package, but it can be way more in the States. But they pay probably around that, maybe a little bit less, but you can pay a lot less for a similar type of service. In terms of other factors, content as well, Paul, is a big one. In the US, studios are moving their best content to their own streaming platforms, so you don't have a lot of the different alternatives that you do have in the US. And any alternatives that you might have, those companies, those streaming giants, they're partnering with European pay TV firms rather than competing with them, since they have access to the consumers and can handle the local marketing, that being a company like Sky. So as opposed to launching your own service, they'll say, okay, Sky, you can access our service through Sky and pay us some money that way. But I guess, Paul, inevitably, pay TV is cable across the pond is going to have to go down at some point once these new services start to crop up.
I would think so, but I think it's going to take a longer time. And that part that you mentioned about the content partnerships is really interesting, because in the US, we've seen a smattering of those. I mean, when Comcast started offering Netflix, that made a lot of headlines. But in Europe, this is par for the course, largely because a lot of the streaming services that we always talk about that have launched in the US over the past year to year and a half are not online in Europe, at least not yet. So it behooves the companies that own that content, which are mostly American companies, to reach European audiences to partner with the existing distribution channels over there. So there are a lot of really interesting reasons why the European market is different. I think it'd be fun to get our European analysts to, do an episode where they talk about some of these fine points of how media is consumed and pricing and distribution and even, just some ingrained habits and a lot of reasons why the markets are quite different.
Yeah, I was stunned to see that. I mean, like we said, 57% of US households have cable and going down versus the 60 for the UK, the over 60 for Germany, and the 90 for France. And all of those markets are either pretty flat to going up. So a completely different trend line there. Let's stick with price for a second, Paul. There was a US-Canada Q2 TiVo study of 4,500 folks. And it found a few things. One was 11% of folks cancelled their pay TV service within the last 6 months. 25%, even more, had either cancelled or cut services. We talk a lot of time about cord cutters. There are the cord shavers, the people who reduce their cable package. They still have it, but they're paying for less services and it costs less. They also found that of those who cancelled or cut their services, 3/4 said price was a factor. However, the research also said that 70% of people were not sure. They're not even sure that they were saving money on entertainment, but 55% said they were at their spending limit. Paul, the study went on to show that on average, consumers spend $142 a month on internet and video. Most of that, $112 of the $142, about 80% goes towards pay TV bundle and internet service. For those with pay TV bundle, $33 was spent on average on SVOD subscriptions. What did you make of all of these findings?
Well, the part that I love about this is that 73% of people who canceled service said price was a factor, but 70% they weren't sure if they were saving money. So that tells you everything you need to know.
Did we save anything?
Right.
Yeah.
Because I think there are a couple of things are going on here. One is that it's a moving target when it comes to the pricing of digital services. More and more of them are rolling out. Almost every one of them has raised prices at some point, even though they're offering bundles that save people money. But bottom line is they are raising their prices so that they're closer to a traditional cable bundle. So it's no surprise that people are confused about whether they're actually saving money. The other thing is that It's not apples to apples. I mean, when you compare a pay TV bundle and the amount of money that you may be spending on subscriptions, that latter part could include things like Netflix, which are never going to be part of that bundle in the first place, but they're part of your experience with what you watch. So people kind of roll all those things together. And I think even it probably muddies some of the surveys when people are asked, how much do you spend on average? So we're talking about a comparison that's not direct, but what is clear is that all of this content costs quite a bit of money, and I don't think there's really a lot of savings to be had at this point going outside of the traditional pay TV bundle, which, 2 or 3 years ago there was, but that was based on, very aggressive pricing that was meant to...
Almost like artificial pricing.
Yeah. I mean, it was meant to just get a lot of people to subscribe, and then obviously they were going to raise the prices, which they have.
Yep, I'm paying for it. I might as well pay a little bit more. You talked about those kind of linear TV type services like YouTube TV or a Sling TV, and they definitely increased their prices, some of them from $50 to $65 plus. But even people like Netflix, Insider Intelligence analyst Daniel Konstantinovich noting that Netflix's standard plan has increased from $8 when it launched in 2010 to $14 today. So it seems like only $6 more. That's nearly doubled over the last decade, and I'm almost certain inflation hasn't gone up that much in the last decade. TiVo study also noting that the number of total video services that people use, pay TV, SVOD, video sites like YouTube, all of those things, the number that people use on average keeps growing. In Q2 2021, the average number of services someone used was nearly 9, up from 7 just 6 months prior. And Paul, they were saying folks had an average of about 5 paid services and nearly 4 free ones. I don't know which way those scales are tipping based on this study, but I would assume that those advertising video on demand, those free services that come with ads would be going up.
Yeah. But even the number of paid services, I mean, not long ago, we were seeing data that suggested it was more like 3. And now if it's more like 5, it wouldn't surprise me at all, just given how many more streaming services, paid services are out there now. But it's also true that a lot of the ad-supported services are gaining ground, so people are more willing to, give those a whirl. Not to mention you have the constants like YouTube and Vimeo, which are always part of the ecosystem, and they're reflected in this study as well.
Finally, Paul, Daniel Konstantinovich was noting in a piece about how Comcast and its UK subsidiary Sky are planning to launch a proprietary line of connected TVs, CTVs, in the US and the UK. Comcast partnered with Chinese manufacturer Hisense for the new TVs, which will be called X-Class TVs, according to Protocol and the Financial Times. Daniel thinks that through the release of these two new CTVs, Comcast is trying to get ahead of the American cord cutters and open a new channel to work with advertisers through. Protocol notes that in addition to traditional smart TV features like apps and on-demand movies, viewers would also have access to thousands of free movies, shows, music, and more. Paul, your thoughts on this move?
Well, I think it's a trend. We're seeing it with companies like Roku licensing, their technology for on an OEM basis for connected TVs. And now Amazon is getting into the game and will be marketing their own connected TVs. So to see Comcast doing it makes a lot of sense, especially when you consider that some of these device-based platforms like Samsung and LG and Vizio, they're selling ads on the platforms and are really creating some substantial ad marketplaces to compete with TV networks and other sources of ad inventory. So if you have the distribution, you have the customer base, then why not market a TV to them? I mean,
right.
Especially when you can load that TV with a lot of your own content and offer bundle pricing or promotional pricing, and then eventually hook those same people into a regular monthly subscription.
You mentioned Amazon coming out with its own brand of TV. We did an episode on that, why Amazon is launching its own TV. That was from September 16th with our very own Andrew Lipsman talking about the reasons why. It was a great episode. That's all we've got time for the first half of this show. It's time now for the halftime report. Paul, what are your takeaways from the first half?
The takeaway is that the pay TV ecosystem is very, very complex and really morphing from a traditional, cable satellite type of distribution to a digitally based one. And there's going to come a point when we really won't be able to distinguish between the two. You're just going to think of pay TV as anything you pay for, regardless of distribution.
That's all we've got time for. Time now for In Other News, but first a quick word from our sponsor, VTEX. Everyone is talking about digital transformation, but what does it mean in real life? Digital Insider is a new podcast series about the digitalization of retail, where business leaders, academics, and thinkers discuss how businesses are transforming and give their perspectives, practical advice, thought process, and lessons learned. Go to digitalinsider.com to learn more, or listen to it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, folks, we are back today. In other news, how to count CoViewing, a new Paramount Plus and Showtime bundle, and how sports fans have changed. Story 1. People turned to live simultaneous viewing during the pandemic, notes David Cohen of Adweek. He cites YouTube ads marketing executive Gina Shalavi, who said, as countries went into lockdown, the connections that made people feel part of a community, things like bantering with other sports fans whilst watching the game, all but disappeared. So people turned to in-person and online co-viewing to fill this gap. Well, now Comscore is looking to count co-viewing in a new TV measurement update. As Kelsey Sutton of Adweek notes, the new method, which will replace household-level audience data, combines Comscore's existing set-top box data with survey inputs from US households to estimate which programs multiple household members are watching together and which ones they are not. Paul, your thoughts on counting co-viewing?
Well, marketers are more interested in marketing to people than to households, so this is right in line with what they want, so it makes perfect sense. The question is, how are you estimating the actual viewership as opposed to the household? Comcast is using survey methodology, which makes sense. It may be less accurate than using a more device-based methodology, but the latter brings up all sorts of issues of privacy and sort of like infringing on people's viewing with things like cameras on connected TVs or, other technologies that measure actual viewing. So there's always going to be tension in how you acquire the data. But in terms of what they're trying to accomplish, it makes sense given, what marketers want.
Story 2. Viacom CBS announces a new streaming bundle that includes both Paramount Plus and Showtime. By themselves, Paramount Plus with ads cost $5. Without ads, it costs $10. And Showtime will run you $11 a month. So if you pair them up separately, it's going to run you about $16 to $21, depending on if you want to avoid ads for those two services, Paramount Plus and Showtime. But the new bundle offers Paramount Plus with ads and Showtime for $10, or ad-free Paramount Plus and Showtime for $13. Paul, how much of a splash can this new Paramount Plus Showtime bundle really make?
Well, I don't know if it's going to make that much of a splash, given that this is what literally every company is doing. You know, they're bundling their own services, and in some cases, those services are not just video. Like, you know, Apple bundles a lot of its different content subscription services, including gaming and news and things like that, and video. But I think it will be effective for Viacom CBS because they're going to be able to get more customers. And, you know, it's really, this is the convergence of two trends that are going on right across the board. One is, as I just mentioned, you know, bundling different services. And the other is offering a hybrid or different tiers of advertising. So this basically does both of those things. And it's hard to imagine that Viacom CBS should be doing anything other than what they're doing.
Right. It also might not make much of a splash because when it comes to video streaming services, American households use, according to a June Morning Consult and Adweek survey, it's Netflix, 62%, surprise, Amazon Video, 54%, Disney Plus, 33%, so they're the top three, and then down in 14th and 15th place were Paramount Plus with and without ads, about 10% each. So it's already not the most popular service in the world. So this bundle might not move the needle too much, but it is the direction that, as Paul said, a lot of companies are going in. Story 3, the effects of the pandemic continue to raise concerns over in-person events, whilst broadcasting sees live sports pitted against short-form content and esports competitions, writes Tom Morris of Global Web Index. He asks, how have attitudes to sponsorship changed, if at all? And what role do athletes play in marketing when the game ends? Mr. Morris thinks that brands intent on reaching sports fans need to pay attention to what we've learned this past year. For example, he points out, short clips and highlights haven't overtaken preference for long-form content. Some sports are breaking ground in new markets. Athletes have grown more influential. There are new opportunities in esports, and women's sport has the potential to reach much further. Paul, what jumps out to you with regards to how sports fans have changed?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things about this study that are really interesting, and they're not all connected, but two that I'll highlight. One is, in terms of women's sports, maybe it's no accident that some of the efforts by women in, for example, the WNBA and the NWSL in the US for pay equity, I think those are starting to resonate, and that's a great thing, and I hope there's more of that. And it's also happened in tennis. The other thing I'll highlight in terms of athletes and the strength of their brands, you know, the biggest case study in how much athletes pull in terms of brand weight these days is that the fact that Lionel Messi earned more than virtually any club could afford to pay. So he's literally exceeding what the market will bear at this point. So the fact that he had to leave Barcelona was largely because neither Barcelona nor any other club could really afford him. And it's a little bit of the market economy gotten turned upside down, but it's also a sign that, you know, these athletes have their own brands, have, you know, social media followings in the tens or hundreds of millions, and they really call a lot of the shots. But in some cases that can backfire on them, as it did in this case.
It's like when people say, no, you can't afford me. No, you literally can't afford me.
Yeah.
If you're Lionel Messi. Okay.
Exactly.
That's what we've got time for this episode. Thank you so much, Paul, for hanging out.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks to Victoria. She edits the show. And thanks to everyone listening in. Hopefully see you guys tomorrow for the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by VTEX.